Welcome to our podcast all about murder and all things true crime. We are the Crime Killers. You're here with Tasha and Jack. Listen with caution. Her choices led to her being the first woman serial killer. We will talk about Aileen's family life and why it made her do the things she did. We will also go in detail with her court case and investigation, and we will talk about her mental state and whether she had any remorse towards her victims. We will also speak about her victims and give the recognition they deserve and why Aileen decided to target these specific people. Now here's a bit of insight as to why Aileen started killing. Aileen was raped by her grandfather's friend at the age of 14. She then gave birth to the baby at 15 and dropped out of school. She was also a prostitute now. Following this trauma, she had an anger and a vendetta against people who needed her for these specific uses. A quote from Aileen, and I do have to say one thing, their families must realise that no matter how much they loved the people that died, no matter how much they loved them, they were bad people and they were going to hurt me. Aileen was born on the 29th of February in 1956. She died on the 9th of October 2002. Her nickname was the Damsel of Death. She married Louis Gratzfell in 1976, but then they got divorced in the same year, and he later died on the 6th of January 2000. Aileen's last words was that she will be back. She also said in her final words, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." Serial killer Aileen Wuornos was sexually abused and thrown out of her home as a teen. Having been involved in previous incidents with the law, she made a living as a sex worker on the Florida's highways, and in 1989 she killed a man who picked her up. Now we'll go into details about the killings that she did. Charles Carskagan, a few days after Spears' body was discovered, that's another victim who we'll get onto at a later date. His body was found in Pasco County. He was shot in the chest and stomach 9 times. Troy Burress, a 50-year-old salesman, on August the 4th, 1990, less than a week after he was reported missing, his body was decomposed. They was able to determine that the cause of his death was 2 gunshots to the torso. Charles Humphreys, he was a retired Air Force major, a police chief, and a child abuse investigator. He was found dead in Marion County on September the 12th, 1990. The body was fully clothed and suffered multiple gunshots to the head and torso. His car was found in Suwannee County. Peter Sims, 65-year-old, left Central Florida and headed to New Jersey in June 1990. His car was found in Orange Springs on July the 4th, 1990. His body was never found. Witnesses described 2 women near the car. Walter Antonio, his body was partially disrobed and was found on November 19, 1990 in a remote part of Dixie County. He had been shot 4 times in the back and head. His car was found 5 days later in Brevard City. David Spears, his body was nude, 43-year-old, was found on June the 1st, 1990 in Citrus County. He was shot 6 times in the torso. Then after Aileen's death, her body was cremated and given to her children. A childhood friend, Dawn Botkins, she spread Wuornos' ashes at the base of a tree in her hometown in Michigan. She had a brother called Keith. Aileen had a closed adoption. This means that she could only get in touch if both parties were interested. She was also given a death sentence on January 27th, 1992. And then this is how the death sentence began. In Florida, a defendant convicted of murder can be punished by death if the murder is found to have been committed under certain circumstances listed in the Florida Penal Code, such as the murder of a police officer or firefighter, that the defendant murdered two or more victims, that the defendant committed a murder for hire, or that the murder was intentionally committed during a kidnapping, burglary, robbery, aggravated rape, or other statutorily specified felony. The subclass of murderers falling into these categories is called capital murder. Wuornos was charged with first-degree murder of Richard Mallory, an armed robbery with a firearm or deadly weapon, and any possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Prosecutions argued Wuornos qualified for the death penalty based on a charge by a murder committed during a robbery. This was the only murder charge against Wuornos that went to trial. The other murder charges ended with guilty or no contest pleas. The defense attorney. Wuornos' case was tried in Volusia County, Florida. Tricia Jenkins, Chief Assistant Public Defender of the 5th Judicial Circuit, represented Wuornos at her trial. Wuornos stood trial once, as she pled no contest or guilty to the subsequent murder charges. Private attorney Stephen Glazer represented her following the first trial and arranged those pleas of non-contest or guilty. The district attorney at the time of Aileen Wuornos' trial was the state attorney John Tanner. Judge Uriel Blount came out of retirement to try the Wuornos case. The trial, the guilt and the innocent phase. Prosecutions begged their case. On the videotaped confession Aileen Wuornos gave to detectives during interrogation. The prosecution was able to introduce evidence related to Wuornos' other murder charges based on a Florida law known as the Williams Rule, which allows evidence related to crimes to be admitted if a slow motive, intent, knowledge, modus operandi or lack of mistake. Prosecutors dismissed Wuornos' initial claims all 7 murders were in self-defense by pointing out that Wuornos' story varied with each subsequent telling. In the earliest confession to officers, Wuornos said that Mallory picked her up while she was hitchhiking and then later went into a seduced wooded area to engage in an act of prostitution. She and Mallory then began arguing. Wuornos said she felt Mallory was going to roll her, that means taking her money, and raping her. She grabbed a bag in which she kept a gun, and the two began struggling over the bag. Wuornos prevailed, pointing the gun at Mallory, and said, "You son of a bitch, I knew you were going to rape me," into which Mallory responded, no I wasn't. At this point, Wuornos shot Mallory at least one time while he was still standing behind the steering wheel. Mallory crawled out of the driver's side and shut the car door. Wuornos said she ran around to the front of the car and shot Mallory again, causing him to fall on the ground. While he was lying there, Wuornos shot him 2 more times, went through his pocket, concealed the body beneath a piece of rug and drove off in his car. Wuornos also told law officers that she had given Tyra Moore inconsistent versions about what happened in one. In one, Wuornos told Moore she was found a dead body hidden under a scrap of the rug in the woods, but in another she confessed to killing. In her initial taped confession, Wuornos never mentioned that Richard Mallory raped her. During the confession, Wuornos was not focused on clearing herself so much as clearing her lover more. Moore had cooperated with police to convince Wuornos that Moore was going to be prosecuted unless Wuornos fully cooperated. Many believed Wuornos appeared confident and not at all upset during her confession. She made easy conversation with interrogators and repeatedly told the public defender to be quiet. I took a life. I'm willing to give up my life because I killed people. I deserve to die. The defence case. The defence argued Wuornos' statement and the videotaped confession were obtained involuntarily and in violation of her rights due to the process, despite the fact she was advised by Miranda rights and in violation her right and provided with a public defender who advised her not to make any lengthy statements. Law enforcement exploitation of her relationship with Moore in obtaining the confession so impaired her mental state and level of functioning. She did not have a rational understanding of her rights and the advice of the counsel. The trial court rejected this argument and denied the defence motion to suppress the videotape confession. However, the videotape confession had already been leaked in the media, further influencing the public perception of Wuornos. During later interviews with police, Wuornos went into detail about her self-defence claim. She explained that she had offered to perform an act of prostitution with Mallory, and she drove to an isolated area where the two drank, smoked marijuana, and talked about for 5 hours. Wuornos described herself as a royal drunk. Around 5 a.m., Wuornos disrobed to perform the act of prostitution. She'd asked Mallory to remove his clothes, but he only wanted to unzip his pants and did not have enough money to pay her fee. Wuornos went to retrieve her clothes, but Mallory whipped a cord around her neck, threatened to kill her like the other sluts have done, and tied her hands to the steering wheel. According to Wuornos' later version, Mallory raped her vaginally and anally and took pleasure from her cries in pain. Mallory eventually untied her and told her to lie down, believing he intended to kill her. She began to struggle. Mallory told her, "You're dead, bitch, you're dead." At this point, Wuornos found her purse and removed the gun. Mallory grabbed her hand and the two began fighting for the gun. Wuornos prevailed and shot Mallory. Mallory kept coming at her despite her warnings, so she shot him twice more. Against the attorney's wishes, Wuornos testified at the trial. A defendant had constitutional right not to testify, and the prosecution could not call her to the stand. However, once the defendant testifies, any refusal to answer any questions can be held against the jury in the court. During her testimony, she repeated the claim of self-defense. During cross-examination, she became agitated and angry. Her attorneys repeatedly advised her not to answer questions as she invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination 25 times. She was the only defence witness. Wuornos' defence also tried to raise an issue that soon after her arrest, 3 detectives on the case, as well as Tyrone Moore, talked to the media to sell the story. Some suspected such deals influenced the witnesses to exaggerate their stories to more lucrative offers. The verdict. The jury found Wuornos guilty on all accounts, including first-degree murder and armed robbery. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, an angry Wuornos shouted, "Son of bitches, I was raped. I hope you get raped, scumbags of America." This outburst was fresh in the jurors' mind as they began sentences phase the next day. After Aileen was found guilty of the murder of Richard Mallory, a penalty trial was held before the same jury to determine whether she would be sentenced to death or life in prison. In most states, at the penalty trial, the jury chooses between death and life imprisonment by deciding whether the case involves certain statutorily specified aggravating circumstances. This means facts that make the crime more serious or the defendant more deserving of death. Any migrating circumstances. This means facts that extenuate serious or defending more deserving of death to make them less culpable, and whether the aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating circumstances. The penalty phase of Aileen Wuornos' trial began January 28, 1992. Reasons for sentencing Wuornos to death. The state expert psychological Dr. Bernard testified that Aileen Wuornos suffered both from borderline personality disorder as well as antisocial personality disorder. Although he agreed with other experts that Wuornos experienced impaired capacity and mental disturbance at the time of the crime, he also concluded the impairment was not substantial and the disturbance was not extreme. He also agreed there was evidence of non-statutorily mitigating evidence such as Wuornos' mental problems, alcoholism, disturbance, and genetic or environment defects. In response to the introduction of evidence of Wuornos' difficult childhood and upbringing, the state called two witnesses from her childhood: Laurie Grady, Wuornos' biological aunt and stepsister, and Barry Wuornos, her biological uncle and stepbrother. Barry Wuornos testified Wuornos' grandfather laid down rules and was someone to look up to. Although she had never seen his father beat Aileen, she sometimes was spanked, and when she was 10, the discipline became more tight. Barry testified that Eileen's biological father, who committed suicide while in prison for rape or kidnapping, was an abusive and criminal type. Reasons for sparing Wuornos' life. In the penalty phase, the defence introduced evidence about Wuornos' background. Her teenage parents were separated months before she was born. Her father, Leo Pittman, moved on to serve time in Kansas and Michigan mental hospitals and later committed suicide in prison, where he was serving time for child molestation and kidnapping. Eileen's teenage mother, Diane Wuornos, described her and her older brother Keith as crying and unhappy babies. Diane's troubled parents adopted Aileen and Keith after she abandoned them. Wuornos' life with her grandparents was physically and verbally abusive. At 6, she suffered facial burns and scarring when she and Keith set fire with lighter fluid. During junior high, Wuornos began exhibiting hearing loss, vision problems, and trouble in school. Her IQ was established at 81 in the low dual normal range. An IQ below 70 is accepted, indicating mental retardation. From the U.S. Supreme Court, ruling in Atkins v. Virginia in 2002, the mentally retarded cannot be sentenced to death. School officials urged that Wuornos received counselling and tried to improve her behaviour by administering a mild tranquilizer. At 14, Wuornos was obviously raped by her grandfather's adult friend. She waited till 6 months before revealing she was pregnant, for which her grandfathers blamed her. Her grandfather later sent her away and forced her to give up the child for adoption. After the grandmother died, her alcoholic grandfather threatened to kill her and her brother if they were not removed from the house. At the age of 15, she became a ward of court. She soon dropped out of school and began engaging in prostitution, as well as alcohol and drug abuse. Her brother died of cancer at 21 and her grandfather committed suicide. 3 defense psychologists concluded Wuornos suffered from borderline personality disorder at the time of the crime, resulting in extreme mental or emotional disturbance. They said her ability to conform her conduct to the law was impaired, and she exhibited evidence of brain damage. One testified her inconsistent confessions, and she should not be considered lying or changing stories in a subjective sense because of her personality and borderline disorder. The defense attempted to portray her as a woman who had lived a horrible life of victimization and violence, with little help from anyone, and later who lashed out at one of her victimizers. Defense attorney Jenkins referred to her client as a damaged primitive child and pleaded with the jury to spare Wuornos' life. The jury penalty recommendation. The jury recommended that the death sentence by a vote of 12-0 concluded that 5 aggravating circumstances and 1 was mitigating factor were present in Wuornos' case. The 5 aggravating circumstances were found. Wuornos had a previous felony conviction involving the threat of violence. Wuornos was committed during the commission of robbery. Murder was committed in order to avoid arrest. Murder was heinous, atrocious or cruel, and the last one was murder was cold, calculated and premeditated. The jury found 1 mitigating factor. Aileen Wuornos suffered from borderline personality disorder. The jury decided that despite her psychological difficulties, Wuornos knew the difference between right and wrong. The judge found her non-statutory migrators. 1. Wuornos suffered antisocial and borderline personality disorder. 2. She may have been physically abused as a child. 3. Her natural father and grandmother committed suicide. 4. Her grandmother's friend died an alcoholic. And 5. Her mother abandoned her as an infant. The judge followed the jury recommendation of death and sentenced Wuornos to the electric chair on January 31st, 1992. A quote from her: we are still worthy of love. We still can be loved. And I do say one thing: their families must realise that no matter how much they love the people that died, no matter how much they loved them, they were bad people because they were going to hurt me. She was executed by lethal injection. In 1992, she was convicted of 1 of the murders and sentenced to death. She later pleaded guilty to 3 more murders and admitted that she killed for profit and not in self-defence. Supporters of Aileen viewed her as a very strong woman. What impact did Aileen Wuornos have on society? Aileen Wuornos is a serial killer who changed how Americans viewed female serial killers with her murders publicly and manipulation. Growing up in an abusive environment, Aileen Wuornos abused by all men in her life. This was the reason for the first female serial killer. Aileen Wuornos grew up in Rochester, Michigan, growing up by Troy, nearby to the south. Wuornos was thrown out of her home and lived in the woods. She was arrested during the mid-1970s for charges related to assault and disorderly conduct, and eventually settled in Florida, where she met wealthy yachtsman Louis Fell. On January 27, 1992, she spent a decade on death row, and she was executed by lethal injection at 9:47 a.m. And the last quote from her was, "To me this world was nothing but evil, and my own evil just happened to come because of the circumstances of what I was doing." So this was her last words, and this is what she thought that was right. And so, Tasha, what did you think?
I'm shocked. I don't know about this case at all. I know bits and bobs, but not much, and I'm shocked. Yeah, you've had bad done to you, but why would you want to do bad to someone else? You're making someone else hell, but your life's been hell anyway. And you also can't blame BPD because there's people out there who have borderline personality disorder, and they don't kill. They kind of just find different things to do.
Yeah, I think she obviously thought that her reactions at the time was justified because of what she went through.
Yeah.
But in reality, it really wasn't.
Yeah, I get that she was abused when she was younger. She was neglected. And, like, her parents didn't want her. And, like, they split up at a very young age. And she obviously got given away. And then she lost a brother. She got raped by her grandfather's friend and had his kid. So she is traumatised, but still don't give the right to kill.
I get that obviously she was traumatised, but in that aspect, it still doesn't make me feel sorry for her.
No.
What I feel sorry for her was that one of the victims' body is still not found to this day. So that family just couldn't get closure.
That's just, like, heartbreaking, man. Because, like, they didn't get closure, and now they won't ever get closure because obviously it's been so long. The body would have been completely, at this point, disposed of. And, like, imagine putting someone else through trauma, even though you've been through trauma, and then going, oh yeah, I have a right to do it because I had something done to me. Like, it gives you no right.
It's just like two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah.
And I think that she thought if she would do what they did to her when she was little, it would make herself feel better.
Yeah.
And then that was wrong.
It's the fact that she didn't shoot them once. She shot them, like, multiple times to make sure they were actually dead, which hurt. Because it's like, say that's, like, your kid, and you just found out he's been shot because he's trying to do what he's doing, and then, like, he gets done wrong.
Well, I don't agree with what she did, but, like, I do think that maybe she shot them more than once to make sure they were actually dead.
Yes,
and that they wouldn't live to tell the tale, and she wouldn't have got caught, so she would carry on doing this and not be as caught as early as she probably thought.
Didn't she only have 7 victims, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was only 7 victims that she had.
That's still quite a lot, though, at the same time, because she was shot and killed 7 people because she was doing prostitution and thought bad in them.
Yeah, like, I still don't think she should have killed all them people.
Yeah.
And I know it's hard when you have something in your head and you obviously want to make the right choice for what you think. But that still doesn't define what she did.
Yeah. It's like, nowadays, it's like everything gets blamed on mental disorders, like BPD, bipolar, and it's not. You go through, like, episodes, because that's what BPD is, and bipolar is where you go through psychotic episodes in your head. But I don't see people nowadays like that, killing people all the time and stuff. It's like, now we've got better technology, better, like, understanding of all these mental disorders. It's getting better. But, like, this case did a good, big impact on, like, police investigation, because obviously I think this was, like, the first proper case with BPD, if I'm correct. Yeah, so.
And obviously she was the first female serial killer.
She was,
so that would have, like, rocked the world in a different place, because you obviously think of, like, serial killers as being men and things like that. But to know that she was possibly the first one, or she was the first one in America, that would have rocked America's world, because they wouldn't have suspected it.
Yeah, it would have been, like, a shock to them, because, like, they've believed for so long that it's just men, and men do bad.
Yeah.
But now, like, a woman's done it, like, oh God, we all do bad.
Yeah, because stereotypically, you would see that the men would probably go out and get their anger out, and they'd be portrayed as a lot stronger and a lot
masculine.
Yeah, and they wouldn't be able to keep their emotions in, as well. Obviously with a woman you wouldn't, like, expect that.
Yeah, we're more,
but at their time you probably wouldn't expect that. But here today, in our time, you probably would expect that, like, men get, like, less masculine, and they tell us what they think, and their emotions are, like, coming out, as well as women. Like, we are evolving every day to, like, get better, and I just hope that this never happens again.
Same. It would be heartbreaking,
because it was an awful thing for them to go through, and their families, like, it was vile. And I mean, I get, they did wrong to you, but that doesn't mean you have to do wrong to the world.
I completely agree with that statement.
Like, in her quotes, I don't think she shows any remorse
Yeah, the part where she says, "I hope you get raped," that's just borderline disgusting. Like, imagine wishing someone go through that, even though you know what the impact is.
Yeah.
Like, that's disgusting.
Yeah, I felt like because she obviously knew what was coming now, she was
Yeah.
trying to justify her actions, and she was trying to say one thing that would hurt all them people in there.
Yep.
And because obviously she didn't know them people, they were just viewing her case, and she obviously didn't know what they've gone through. And could you imagine if
Well, no,
that
actually
would've-
had.
Yeah, like could you imagine the like psychological impact that would have had?
It would have been horrible.
Like it was just uncalled for, that comment. It wasn't the nicest comment you could have said, and I get emotions were heightened, and you get very angry because she's just been sentenced to death. So I don't feel that she should have said that, and maybe that didn't help her case because obviously the sentence happened the following day.
Yeah.
And obviously she had the outburst the day before her sentence. That would make her look bad anyway. Because of the things that she said during the outburst.
Yeah.
So it would just make her look even more bad than she was portrayed to look bad, even though I don't think you can get any worse than being a serial killer.
Yeah.
But yeah, she didn't really help her case. And yeah, she didn't really prove her innocence either.
Yeah.
I think she was gloating in the fact that she killed all them people.
Yep.
And it was like everyone that she killed was an achievement.
Yeah, so altogether, like, to wrap it up, did you, like, looking into this case, like, were you interested?
Yeah, I was really interested because I like to see the psychological
Yeah.
side of the case.
Whereas I like to see the kind of meaning.
Obviously, like, my heart goes out to all the
Yeah.
victims, but I like seeing what makes their brain tick and what makes them want to do that, because I think that is a very interesting
That is very
impact
interesting.
of the serial killers. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
think that's very interesting.
I think it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you want to hear more, sub to our YouTube Crime Killers for more podcasts. The podcast is an NCM production and recorded in the PM studio.